Welcome back. You are tuned into Traders Nation. My pleasure to have with us here today Peter Goodman, author of Past Due, The End of Easy Money and the Renewal of the American Economy. Peter, welcome to Traders Nation. How are you today?
Thanks very much. I'm great, thanks.
Oh, good. Peter, for 2 decades, America's binged on imports, easy credit, and a spending spree abetted by an ever-increasing home values, and then the bill came due, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did. I mean, we just got used to living far beyond our incomes, and all this credit. I mean, first, we had the internet bubble, which gave a lot of people the ability to spend beyond their incomes because they could just keep tapping their stock portfolios.
Right.
And then the housing bubble,
right,
which gave us this, endless river of offers for home equity lines of credit, masked the fact that in a lot of households, wages were stagnating and eroding, and a lot of people were reaching for credit, not to fill their closets full of shoes and their living rooms full of electronics, though we know plenty of people like that,
sure,
but really just to deal with the fact that their wages weren't paying for things like health care and education and housing.
Right. All right, so we know that the consumer bubble twice happened in the last decade. Pretty painful. This last one put the world in a recession. Some even consider maybe even a depression. But are we creating right now, because this sounds hauntingly familiar, that the government right now is kind of doing the same thing, spending money that it doesn't have, printing money that it just keeps on printing. Are we seeing a government bubble being created right now?
Well, it depends. That's a good way of putting it. I mean, if it turns out that we've taken $800 billion in stimulus and who knows how many hundreds of billions of dollars to bail out the financial system and essentially just propped ourselves up for short term and gotten one-time hits like cash for clunkers,
right,
or the credit for first-time home buyers, then yeah, we've essentially just printed up a lot of dollars. We've devalued our currency. We've added to our deficit problems and added to the risk of inflation and, eventually a precipitous drop in the dollar. However, if we've taken this money and we've spent it wisely, if we bring functionality back to the financial system, which is going to require new regulations in addition to these bailouts,
right,
to stave off catastrophe, and we seed job growth in productive industries, then maybe we'll look back and say, well, that was a tough time, but we spent this money wisely, and now we're in a position to get the growth we'll need to pay back the deficit.
Peter, is that a big if? Because, on the consumer side, we're stung. I mean, it is stung. Nobody's experienced this type of sting in this generation, so we're stung. But if the government's wrong, then how much more pain do you think there may be?
There's no question that if we don't regulate the financial system and Wall Street goes back to business, and meanwhile we try to convince consumers to go out and spend money that we're still not really earning,
right,
then we're going to have bigger crises going forward. I mean, we're going to be here again. We should have learned this lesson back in the late 90s when before the tech bubble burst, long-term capital management, this big hedge fund, almost collapsed and required a $3.5 billion private bailout.
Yeah.
And at the time, people like George Soros said, if we don't get a handle on the leverage that's in our financial system, if we don't force financial institutions to set aside real capital against their bets, we're going to be here again. And the Clinton administration Treasury, led by Bob Rubin, who went off and made over $100 million trading derivatives at Citibank,
right,
and Larry Summers and Alan Greenspan basically killed that and, brought us where we are now, $700 billion later. So, yeah, there's no question. We got to fix the incentives that have encouraged reckless gambling. We've got to allow saving, which requires job growth, and we better spend this money wisely, or we are adding to serious deficit woes for no gain.
But are we spending this money seriously and wisely? I don't see it. Arizona got $46 million in stimulus money, and it's going to buy blankets and cots. And while that's good for blanket manufacturers and cot manufacturers, I see it for more social programs than actually stimulating anything but. Look at the line in Detroit, Peter. There's people in lines and lines and lines, and they need help, no doubt about that. But stimulus money, I don't think, is being directed in the right way. I don't see jobs being created, and you can't tell me that you're counting 5 or 6 jobs that you saved somewhere, and that's of significance importance.
Well, I mean, look, all you got to do is point to the reality that we've got 10.2% unemployment. The Obama administration told us that if we had the stimulus, the worst-case scenario was 8.9% unemployment, to see that, something's gone wrong in our calculations. But I guess I take a longer view. I'm interested in what happens to this money that's going through particularly research universities. I mean, we've really fallen behind in terms of investment into applied research, and that's where, the future innovation comes from.
Agreed.
That's where the real job growth, making stuff, designing services that are of real and lasting value. I mean, that's really what it's all about. We got to grow our way out of this by coming up with products and services that we can sell around the world, so, we're living on paychecks
Peter,
instead of home equity lines of credit.
Yes, all right, so we need a catalyst. We need a catalyst, and we shouldn't be looking towards the government for that, right?
Well, the government has a role to play. We certainly shouldn't be looking to the government to, enable our paychecks. I mean, this is a capitalist society. May it always be so, and private money is ultimately going to drive job growth. But you think about, where the Internet came from, funneling a lot of research dollars through research institutions around Silicon Valley, and then that created the ideas that entrepreneurs took and turned into real businesses. And the same thing could potentially happen now in renewable energy, where the government has effectively created a market by mandating in many states that utilities have to buy larger shares of their energy supplies from clean suppliers like solar and wind power, just to name a couple, and that creates a market for things like wind turbines, which are big and heavy and hard to ship, expensive to ship, and we may as well make them here in the United States, where we have a lot of laid-off Rust Belt manufacturing workers who have skills and need jobs. So that's just one area where, you're talking about private money, but with a little boost from the government.
Peter, I mean, everything. Accounts were shut down, account ceilings were knocked down to balances, the whole 9 yards. It was like I have never seen in my life credit frozen or taken away.
Yeah, I hope you never do again.
Like that. Absolutely devastating for businesses and people in general. So is the market, if they straighten themselves up, because let's face it, I don't think a market wants the feds too much into their shorts, and if they don't start self-regulating, we're going to see this again.
Well, I don't think self-regulation is the answer. I mean, we've been living with this idea. I mean, this was the Greenspan idea, that we don't need some annoying regulator telling AIG to put aside real dollars against their credit default swap, because, the buyer of those credit default swaps, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, they'll be much more motivated to take a good look at AIG's books and make sure that, this insurance policy they're buying is covered by real dollars than some regulator would.
Sure.
Well, we know how that turned out. I mean, we do need markets to innovate, and financial services is part of our future, but that's got to happen in the context of sensible rules that at least ensure that there are real dollars reserved. Because otherwise, Wall Street will do what Wall Street just did, enjoy an equation where, heads we win and tails the taxpayer loses. And one could argue that given the bailouts that we've now seen, that's more likely than it was before.
Yeah, let's move on to recovery, because you know what? We're pulling our purse strings back. People are saving more now than ever. They're forced to, right, Peter?
Absolutely.
So is this enough? You got saving money, pulling back, but it's really hurting businesses. Nobody's spending the dough. What is going to be the recipe for recovery for America?
I mean, ultimately, we've got to have some jobs so that people can afford to spend money, and people earn money at work and take their wages and go out and spend them and create business opportunities for other companies that then hire workers, and a bunch of things have to happen. I mean, the first thing that has to happen is we have to have functionality return to the financial system. It's a good thing that we're not now talking about a repeat of the 1930s banking crisis, but anybody in the small business world or the startup world knows that it's still awfully hard to borrow money.
Right.
That's just a question of confidence returning, maybe some additional government programs through the Small Business Administration, but we've got to have a reason to take a risk if you're running a business and expand and hire people. And that, again, it comes back to jobs. We need to see a clear path to productive industries.
All right, Peter, I've been saying it's the economy, stupid. It's part two that just seemed to be focused the other complete different way, with tons of masses of amounts of legislation in areas that we don't have money to spend on. Past Due's the name of the book. Peter Goodman's with us today. Peter, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
So much.
All right, there you have it. Past Due. Get a copy today. Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. We'll be right back.